Good morning, everyone. I want to, how's the sound? Can everyone hear? Thumbs up? Yes? Great. I want to start out this morning by dedicating the merit of my practice to Sojin Mel Weitzman, who was abbot at Zen Center and at Berkeley Zen Center, and who he transitioned this week. He's no longer with us. And he was special in the lives of many of us, but I literally would not be a Zen priest today if it were not for Mel, for the very practical reason that he was the teacher of my teacher, Michael Winger, but more so in the run-up to the actual day of ordination. I had decided, which it turns out, like many folks about to be ordained, that this was probably a huge mistake and that I was not the right person for this. And so Mel and I had a long talk. He was participating in our teaching in the last week. And he said, well, he said, a Zen priest, he said, in many faiths, the priest is like the general leading his troops or her troops to victory. But in Zen, the priest is like a farmer. You help plant the garden and you let go of whatever it is that grows there. You're ready and accepting of whatever that grows. And that teaching really was a turning of the Dharma wheel for me. That the kind of service that one can provide by choosing a life of a priest in Soto Zen really was about tilling the earth and planting the seeds and nurturing them, but hands off in terms of what happens. So I thank Mel for that teaching those many years ago, and for all of the wonderful teachings and service that he provided at Zen centers across the Bay Area. So thank you, Mel. So I want to start today with just a little poem that some of you have probably heard before. It's called The Clearing by Martha Postlewaite. And it says, do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize it and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. And of course, the interesting thing in the poem is you're not quite sure whether that poem refers to you being worthy of rescue or the world, but it's probably tied in. So I've been thinking a lot, and the title of the talk today is about creating sanctuary. And I, and probably many of you, rushed across the threshold of January 1st, looking over our shoulder, so really wonderfully happy and grateful to have 2020 behind us. There were vaccines and a new political order. New Year's Day in San Francisco was sunny and bright and beautiful. And I found myself living with wise hope, I thought, in gratitude. So we heard songs on the radio that day about the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and lots of people talking about a new day had begun. And then life continued to unfold, as it does. And our instruction in Buddhism to dwell happily in things exactly as they are has been put to the test again. So how do we live as human beings and as Buddhists when life is frightening, potentially dangerous, complicated, or bewildering? Might seem a bit naive, or even some sort of spiritual bypass or point of privilege, white privilege, whatever kind of privilege, to say dwell happily with things as they are. Easier for some to do than others on a very practical, humane, day-to-day level. But at the very least, I think it gives us an opportunity. The fact is that we all live together, and together we live in challenging times right now. We came together this morning because I think, and I believe, that we have a desire to make the world a better place. And as the Buddha taught, for me, for others, and the truly wise person works for the benefit of me and others. So I think that's why we come on Saturday morning and other times during the week to sit together, to be together, because we know that Zazen is the core of our practice, and it's the opportunity for us all to be together to be silent, to be equal, to have an opportunity to really assess what's going on inside us and what's going on in our world. I know that myself and probably many of us showed up at Buddha's door seeking a sanctuary from our lives. Mine was at that point in time pretty chaotic and in need. I was in need of some rest. I was exhausted and perhaps broken and whatever. Mel Weitzman himself actually used to do a teaching where he said no one showed up at the door of a Zen center whole and healthy. So that's a judgment, of course, but my experience over 29 years has given a lot of evidence to that in terms of the folks who I've had the wonderful opportunity to meet and work with. So sanctuary is defined as a safe place. In some definitions, excuse me, a holy place, a refuge. In the Free Dictionary, it's defined as a condition of being protected or comforted. And so for me, I think that's what I'm really talking about when I talk about creating sanctuary. When I came to Buddhism, I was seeking a safe place. I was seeking people and practices that could make me feel whole again. Opportunities for my inner life to be aligned with the outer life. And as I learned from the teachings of the Buddha, I got a surprise. As I learned, I had a revelation that the way to find such a place was twofold. First, to look inside, to really pay attention to me, and then to act outside, to be of service. So those seem to be the two principles that everybody who taught me, everybody who was patient with me as I tried to learn, kept expressing over and over again. Look inside, bring mindful awareness, and then act outside, be of service, be an engaged Buddhist. So the first part of that is the looking inside. And the teachings seem to suggest that a sanctuary is co-located with my abiding sense of dis-ease or discomfort at that time, uncomfortableness, suffering, dukkha, with cycles of trying to be a connected, compassionate human being, that they were deeply embedded, some might say enmeshed. And that in some of the very early Buddhist writings, what I found was that the path of the Buddha was in some early writings described as threefold: morality, meditation, and wisdom. And that could be the full spectrum of a Buddhist practice. So I myself have been raised in a spiritual tradition that had lots of rules about right and wrong. We had judgments, confession, repentance, shame and guilt, lots of things going on. But we were human. And we also had faith leaders who blatantly taught the rules of God with fire and brimstone, and then who followed various paths of the flesh, something like greed, hate, and delusion. They were human and flawed humans, as are we all, some more so than others, as it turned out. But when I got to Buddha's door, as I said, a bit broken and in need of sanctuary from the chaos of the world, some of which I had created myself quite expertly, I wasn't sure what a good workable definition of morality even was. I was so confused at that point. How could I be the kind of person I wanted to be if truthfully, I wasn't exactly sure what kind of person I did want to be. So to do that assessment of who and what I am and who would I like to be requires that you have some notion of that. And I had lived a good part of my life struggling to survive various kinds of abuse and oppression and just life in general. Don't mean to make it sound more dramatic than it was, but you know, I had a pretty decent life at that point. I'd managed to get through a few college and graduate programs. As my father used to say, how many degrees can you get before you actually have to go get a job? The answer to that turns out to be 4. And I did those degrees through a lot of hard work and a fair amount of corner cutting. That seemed to be a good path. And then I had built a career for myself by the time I found my way to Buddhism that sustained and frequently nurtured me. Truth to be told, I thought of myself as a collectivist. I worked in social justice. I had all not-for-profit jobs engaged in the promotion of health for various folks. Health justice was my entire career, and mental health justice. And truth to be told, when I look back on it now, I had a lot of interesting jobs because sometimes I used my skills to get those jobs, often in social justice and collectivism. And getting those jobs sometimes involved stepping around or perhaps over someone else to get there. So as I look back on it, even that right livelihood sometimes was fraught with that question about what is true morality, what is the meaning of a moral life. So anyway, most of you know the path, even though we have the honor and privilege to do the work we do in hopefully right livelihood. Like the priests of my youth, social engagement was about out there. I could go out and do the good work, but I really was missing the necessity or the opportunity to do the internal work, to do a sort of turn inwards and slow down and stop and say, okay, so who is this doing this work? Who is this living in these communities? And what kind of person can he be? So in Dale Wright's book called The Six Perfections, he starts with a simple question: how shall I live, and what kind of person shall I be? And that really was when I got to Buddhism, and as I have been a student for many years, that is the question: how shall I live? And that doesn't mean just from 9 to 5 when I'm working, or on Saturday mornings if I'm giving a Dharma talk that people are listening to and looking at me in a little tiny square in the corner. But what it means is, what kind of person will I be all the time? When I'm getting ready to go to a conversation, am I planning how to win the conversation, or am I opening my heart to really hear what the other person has to say? After I've had the conversation, or as I'm having the conversation, am I truly listening and being present and creating a safe space for that person to express what he, she, or they are feeling and needing to express? Or am I busy thinking about what I need to say next to bring this to a close, or to bring it to a conclusion that pleases me? And as I walk away by myself and leave any interaction, engagement I'm having with another human being, am I satisfied that I was fully present? Or am I thinking about, next time I should have said this, or next time I'll say this, or whatever? So awakening, he says in his book, is not enough. Whatever we realize must be integrated into how we actually live every moment, every day. So it's not about how thoroughly I study the Dharma or how closely I stick to the forms and practices. Those are both important. It's not even just what I do with my brief and fleeting moments of something that feels like awakening or liberation. It's about what I do moment to moment, person to person, with this experience of being invited to and supported on the Buddhist path. The Buddha teaches us that reading the Dharma is like having a cup of tea. Living the Dharma is drinking the tea. So to actually be doing it as an experience. So I've been reading and thinking about the 6 perfections, and both Wright's book and taking another look at Norman Fisher's book and others. And Wright's book is subtitled The Cultivation of Character. And that seems like a really important thing for us as Buddhists to really be working on. I take this to mean that how we show up with friendliness and kindness always. The cultivation of character is about all of that. And it's about doing it from morning to night. It's about it being an organizing principle in my life. So when I'm alone, when I'm with others, am I being someone who is friendly and kind? When I watch the news on Wednesday evening, did I find myself rushing to judgment and truthfully sentencing and watching preferred punishments rattle around in my brain? So who was I in that moment? Did I say, what else is possible? These folks are suffering, they've been fed delusions, etc., whatever, something kind, or not to say any of that, just to say, who are these people? And why are they so angry and hurt? And may they find peace and ease. You know, just a simple prayer, may they find peace and ease. And that's why we call this six perfections, because we're not perfect, but we are trying to perfect the way we respond in life. So I get a chance when I'm thinking about the untimely demise of some political leader, to say, nope, that's as temporarily, momentarily tasty as that bite of poison might be, it is still a bite of poison. And so who am I, even in those trying moments, like Wednesday? So the six perfections, generosity, morality or ethical conduct, tolerance or patience, energy, which Norman describes as joyful effort, which I really appreciate, meditation, and wisdom. And they teach us about dimensions of what it means to be human. And they're called perfections because they teach us that all of that is work. We don't wake up one day wholly evolved as somebody who has a joyful effort to be patient with all beings and to be wise in all situations where we're called on. The perfection is something that I can continue to work towards, to perfect my behavior, to perfect my thinking, to perfect my words. And, you know, in our life, in my life, I don't know about yours, that idea of perfection would be a grand excuse to give it all up and not be doing any work. Well, I can't be perfect, so why bother? So I think instead we can understand the perfections as the beginning of the work of moral development. And I can continue throughout my life without having to beat myself up on the days when I don't quite make it, and when in the situations, but I get the opportunity to say, the perfection of wisdom, the perfection of patience, I get to keep trying every day, at every hour, not just when it's convenient or comfortable for me. I get to keep working on it. So the center, excuse me, of what I've been thinking about this week is the paramita of morality, sila paramita, how a disciple of the Buddha should live. And, you know, when we think about this, that the Buddha, Thich Nhat Hanh, excuse me, said that it's like if we're trying to think about the North Star in order to go north. We look at the North Star in order to go north, but we don't ever expect to actually get to the North Star. We just expect to go north, you know, one step at a time, one walk at a time. So in our journey to find morality, to find the perfection of morality, I think we have this real opportunity to think about how we might do that, how we might be the kind of person that we want to be, one day at a time, that principles that we can live in with harmony and difference with other human beings and with the planet, in fact, so that we can find joy and peace and ease rather than be depleted by things like what happened on Wednesday. So I think this perfection of morality, this idea of a careful and thorough look at how we should live can be really important. And as Buddhists, we have the precepts to guide us in that. And, you know, there are 14 precepts in Soto Zen, 10 grave precepts. Thich Nhat Hanh in his practice teaches 5. And so I'll just mention a couple of them that in the way that I've been working with them, and invite you when we have time to talk later to tell us how you're doing it. But the first one, of course, traditionally is do not kill, or Thich Nhat Hanh says refrain from harming living beings. And so most of us, of course, don't kill in terms of actually taking the life of another sentient being. But there's so many ways to kill somebody's hope, to kill somebody's confidence, to kill somebody's sense of trust, to kill somebody's sense of intimacy. So there are many ways throughout the day that we can have a negative impact that is harming to others, that is diminishing to others. So the basis for engaged Buddhism, as taught by Thich Nhat Hanh and many others, is this idea of being actively engaged, not only in not harming, because the actual precept says do not kill and do not allow others to kill. So if you see something, do something, as the saying says now. So I don't know about you, but what I want to practice is to be front and center in my communities, in my sanghas, in my life, and in my families, and help myself and others to make choices about being less harming. For me, a big part of that is to slow down, because I find that in the occasions in my life when I have been created harm for others is when I'm moving too fast, and that I haven't slowed down enough to think about the impact of what I might be doing. So I need to balance my desire to have social justice and to have engaged Buddhism with another spiritual principle, and the principle of it's none of my business. That there are many times in life that we encounter other human beings who are getting along just fine, and who have well thought out, well prayed about, well meditated about practices of their own that may not make sense to me, but there's no need for me to get involved. And much of what goes on in our families and communities and sanghas, we tend to engage and react with because we want to create change and we want to fix things that we perceive to be broken. But in my experience in the last 10 years, if we slow down enough, we sometimes realize that that's my interpretation of what's broken and isn't shared by others. And so the process of slowing down allows others and myself to come to an agenda for action that is inclusive and non-harming. Second one is about not stealing or not taking what is not freely giving. And in this one, we think about possessing nothing that should belong to others. And this plays out in a couple ways, I think, in our life. When we consider something as simple as enjoying works of art in a museum, we know that in the last few years, there's been a lot of discovery about how many of those artifacts and historical pieces got into those museums. And they were, culturally appropriated or stolen from smaller countries and cultures. And so we get to think about how we enjoy works of art, and is there a more humane way to do that? And the second thing that comes to mind is when we eat a large, really delicious, tasty, expensive meal prepared by somebody in a kitchen of a restaurant whose children will go to bed hungry tonight. We get to think about how we show up in the world. So I'm certainly not saying, as any of you who know me would know, that a disciple of the Buddha does not eat in restaurants. Although currently we can't eat in them anyway, so it's good practice. But I think it's like following that North Star. How do we help create a world where the minimum wage, they were talking yesterday on the news, the minimum wage in a certain part of Florida is $5.15 an hour for restaurant workers and others. And here in San Francisco, it's $15 an hour. But as we all know, you can't possibly pay the rent and feed your children with that. So how can we be engaged in supporting workers and community members and not just being frustrated, as I certainly have been, that my restaurants and shops and salons are not available to me during the recent months. The third one is the inappropriate use of sexuality. And this is clear this year. We're in a world that is in so much need of intimacy, true and safe sharing, and the opportunity to be held safely and comfortably. And it's also a world with a very mixed history of sex being completely tied up in power, oppression, and violence. So we need, I think, as we continue to move forward, to create a world in which everyone can be safe within their own body, safe to love and be loved. And importantly, I think, where each person can be reminded or taught that they are worthy of love. As the Buddha taught us, if you search the entire world, you won't find anybody more worthy of your love than you. So the next one is the unkind speech. And this is one that everybody's worked on right speech. If you've been around Buddhism for more than a few days, we all get a chance. But Thich Nhat Hanh's writing, particularly this week, was really interesting. He didn't write it this week, but when I read it this week, do not spread news that you do not know to be certain, and do not criticize or condemn things about which you are unsure of. And so starting a long time ago in this current political and so cycle, I was getting phone calls on Wednesday from early in the morning till late at night from folks who had the latest news from Washington about who did what to who and what was going on. And as each hour evolved, of course, whatever that hot news was from the last hour was now different and had been replaced. The only thing was that the first hour allowed someone to really relish their angst and concern and depression and share that with whoever would answer the phone. And then an hour later, when it got even worse, we could do it again. So it's important in this one, as we try to develop a way of being moral people, a way of creating a sanctuary where we can all be safe. I think it's important to think about our speech. Like, you know, we know that no one would willfully call somebody last Wednesday and try to make them feel angry or depressed or to exacerbate their feelings of fear or trepidation. But I think what this precept invites us to do is to really think about the impact of what we say, as well as the words that we're saying. So I think that's when we think about a speech in sanctuary, it's like creating a place where somebody doesn't have to be worried that the words that we speak, albeit with good intention, can cause distress. So the last one I want to talk about is the one that's about intoxicating the mind or of self or others. And along with what I was just saying about the words, I think in Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching is really clear that he's not just talking about alcohol or drugs or gambling or whatever. He's talking about anything that intoxicates the mind of self or others. And so I would just offer that, particularly this week, I'm really clear that CNN and Fox News are every bit as intoxicating as Jack Daniels and Coke. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity to create sanctuary for ourselves. And I've made this vow many times, and some of you have, like, I'm not going to turn on CNN, whatever the week happens to be. There's going to be a lot of shit going down, and I'm not going to turn on CNN because I don't want to, because if I start, I won't stop. And so I must confess that as good as I got this week was a vow to myself on Wednesday that I was not going to turn on CNN. And then the vow became, because I was doing some work on the computer, the vow became, well, every time that I need to take a break to go to the restroom or make some tea, maybe I'll just turn it on for a second. Yeah. And you can guess where that vow went as the day goes on. But I think that we have this opportunity when we think about sanctuary. We all need a safe place in which to grow, a safe garden in which our seeds can, our karmic seeds can come forward. And Buddhism teaches us a lot about that. Developing peace and serenity through ethical and conscientious living. This is Thich Nhat Hanh. We can help our society to make a transition from one based on greed and consumerism to one based on thoughtfulness and compassionate action. And that can be our deepest value. And so, as I was saying in the beginning, when I first came and I was trying to think about, how do I want to live? What kind of person do I want to be? The important question is to go to find out, what are our deepest values? What are our values? Do we actually value having a compassionate society? Do we actually value having a society in which children are not hungry, etc.? And then figuring out how to do that. And I think, I take this teaching very seriously. Dogen says in the Bindawa and on the Endeavor of the Way, Buddhist ancestors, out of their kindness, have opened the wide gate of compassion in order to let all sentient beings into realization. So our Buddhist practice becomes really important. It's not adjacent to my desire to be a moral person, to live with compassion and kindness. It's not adjacent to Buddhist practice of zazen and study and rituals and forms. It is all practice. Every bit of that is practice. And so Dogen calls zazen elsewhere the Dharma gate of joyful ease. So if we're trying to create a place of sanctuary for self and others, then our basic Buddhist practice of zazen, what we did together this morning in the midst of this week that we're having in our country, and welcome to those who are watching our country from afar, probably with some concern, I would imagine. But zazen allows us, again, as I said in the beginning, to be equal, to be silent, to be held in compassion. There are however many of us there are here today, and the wider sanghas that are practicing all around the world on this particular Saturday. That it's this Dharma gate of joyful ease, So we can provide a place of stillness. We can encourage and promote and hold this place of Buddhist practice that allows us, no matter what's going on in the rest of the world, to return to our inner life, to return to our Buddha nature, to arouse bodhicitta and kindness for others. So refuge from the storm, refuge from what was going on Wednesday and other days in other countries. It's right here. It's in our heart mind. Wherever we happen to sit, and we can sit alone or with others, wherever we happen to do walking meditation, and that can be in the zendo or at the beach, sanctuary from the chaos and the madness of our world is right here, and we have that. And then just briefly, the second part of what I learned was to go outside. After finding spiritual practice and establishing spiritual practice and working really diligently to have the practice of the Buddha's path, then to go outside. The bodhisattva business of creating safety for others. We get this opportunity, and I don't need to make up words for this because we all know the Bodhisattva prayer written by Shantideva. So quickly, may I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles, and for the boundless multitude of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like the earth and sky until all beings are freed from sorrow and all are awakened. So, you know, in his book, Not Always So, Suzuki Roshi says, you think you can only establish true practice after you attain enlightenment, but that's not so. So again, coming back to how do we do this? And if we can't do it exactly right, maybe we shouldn't be doing it because we might teach someone the wrong way. But nothing we see or do or hear is perfect. Suzuki Roshi says, true practice is established in delusion, in frustration. If you make some mistakes, that's where you establish your practice. There is no other place for you to establish practice. So I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and Sharon Salzberg's new book, which I mentioned last time I spoke here, is called Real Change, and I highly recommend it. But she says that I've been working, she says this year particularly, to have a place that is grounded in peace and ease, and to be satisfied with things just as they are, and to want to create change. So I've had a good life in the last few years, and you know, I'm retired, and I get to do a few projects that I want to do, and get to do some teaching when I have the opportunity. But as I've experienced the level of grief and exasperation and sadness in many people, based on shelter in place for the last 11 months, and as I've looked at the willful delusion and the angst that created in folks in DC, not just the terrorists and the protesters, but the elected officials who tormented them with delusion. As I look at the preventable situation of 400,000 of our family members and friends dying unnecessarily of COVID-19, and as I share that statistic of that 1 in 5 children in America will go to bed hungry tonight. Sharon says that deep in our hearts, we all long for a feeling of being at home in this body, in this mind, with somebody else perhaps, but on this planet. Somewhere, if we look carefully at our actions, what we say or do, what we refrain from saying or doing, we can sense within them an urge towards wholeness, towards happiness, towards connection. This urge to find a home, to find happiness, to find a sanctuary, and to make ourselves feel whole again. Sharon concludes that paragraph by saying, this message is hidden deep inside each of us, telling us to take care of ourselves, and that word is plural, ourselves, us and others. So I think that we have this wonderful opportunity to take a look at the world that we live in, which has good days and bad days, good hours and bad hours. I think that Norman Fisher in his book, when he talks about this energy, he says that what's required is energy and diligence, and he calls that joyful effort. So that while the days might seem difficult and the practice might seem complex. He says that Bodhisattva has love and desire to be of service, and that love and desire must be limitless. So, you know, I think I have limits, and so that's what this topic is important for me, because I think that I am willing to work for the good of myself and the good of each of you and the good of the planet, but that there definitely are limits that take place. I get tired sometimes or frustrated, or it's just easier to come in the house and not watch CNN, but watch that other poison called Netflix. So I have this opportunity to do this work this season that I've been working on, which is to discover what kind of human being do I want to be, and what are my values, what are the morals that lead me to want to be engaged, and to want to do that with patience and kindness and love, and to want to do that from a place of zazen, and take the mind of zazen when I get up off that cushion and take it with me, remembering that slow is okay, that pausing is okay, that focusing on the breath is okay, and that there's no need, there is nobody in this entire world waiting for me to be in charge of everything. So that going back to that collectivism, going back to the kind of culture in which Buddhism was founded, where people genuinely cared for themselves and each other, is exactly, I think, what Mel Weitzman was teaching us when he said being engaged in Buddhism or being a priest in Buddhism is like being the farmer. We plant the seeds and step back, allowing whatever it is to grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for your talk. Please put up a hand.
David.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm wondering what you would say about engaged Buddhism in the time of COVID, because I have moments of frustration that, you know, I would like to go to like a climate change rally or a Black Lives Matter event or something like that to try and involve myself. And but since I'm in an at-risk group, I'm extremely hesitant to get outside of my bubble. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, thank you, David. I think engaged Buddhism, you know, it says, the teaching says it starts with us, and then others, and then us and others. And so I think there's a couple things. One is on a very, what I've been trying to practice with is to really help people to not be getting their health information from CNN or any of those other sources. People can become tremendously upset when they read the statistics, and I was in a conversation the other day after a meeting where there were 4 people, all of whom were giving the statistics for San Francisco, all 4 of whom were absolutely determined about what the level was, and all 4 of them had different information. So I think that one of the things we can do is to try to be, in terms of COVID, is from our place of stillness and peace, we can say to people, only take in the information that's useful to you. And as the Right Speech one says, only comment on information about which you are sure. So if you're not sure, and if you're prone to, you know, I used to work in public health and read epidemiology reports every Monday morning, that was my job, and would freak out every Monday afternoon about what numbers had gone up or whatever. And the next Monday they'd be different. And so I think it's one of the things we can do simply is to help people to not deliberately manufacture misery in their lives by taking in overloads of information that is of questionable validity. So that's one simple way we can do it, is just to help people, if they need to talk about COVID, talk about it, but talk about it in ways that you just did of how do we protect ourselves. And so I do think on that second part that the engagement, there are ways people can do support those movements that you talked about from home, by making some phone calls, by writing some letters, by sending some postcards, by if your circumstance allows, sending a little donation to the group that's doing the organizing. So there are ways that make sense if we're at a high risk group in a high risk group, and I'm in a couple of them, that it makes sense not to go be in large public spaces for all the reasons that we would all imagine. And so I think, as much as I want to support various, certainly feeding the children and Black Lives Matters and other causes, it does not make sense for me to go rally on City Hall Plaza. It just, at this point, doesn't make sense. If other people can do that because of the level of that they've assessed of their risk, and they're planning to mask and socially distance, I support that and think it's wonderful. But I think I've let myself, it's like there are many other dangerous things we could do. Last year they decided in a couple of the protests to close down highways by walking out onto interstate highways in a large group. And that's not a particular protest I would have joined in, because it seems to me that the benefit of the protest is not worth the danger to the lives of the people that you're sending out into the street. And so with COVID, I think we can find a way to be supportive of the causes we want, and to encourage others to be supportive of the causes without putting our lives or the lives of others in danger by showing up in places that are potentially super spreader events.
You can unmute yourself.
Anybody else have a thought or question?
Yes, Stephen, this is Janos. Thank you
Hi, Janos.
for your talk. It was very timely. And I also this week have been pulled into listening to MSNBC and CNN, and in off center. And sort of my question is twofold, is that I'm a therapist and I work with a lot of folks who have trauma. And, when you're in the middle of a trauma, when the boat is sinking, when there's a fire around, if the Zendo is on fire, it's like all hands on deck. Okay, my focus is 100% on putting out that fire. And then what happens is, after the fire's been put out, you can become hyper vigilant. Oh, did I see a little fire here? Oh, okay, put that out. Oh my God, there's cinders over here. And so it's like I realize, all right, after this trauma where the house is on fire, and I didn't realize how dangerous it is, what are some other factors I need to make sure that, new fires are not going to be started around me? Mm-hmm. And so I've noticed that, I do need that stepping back to recenter, mm-hmm. To find my sense of peace. And that's what I find in Zazen, is like how then to engage. And I have to say that, how do you balance that when you are in this state where, things don't feel safe, there has been a real fire, and I do need to kind of look around and saying, oh, okay, is there, something that I need to do to make sure that this stays safe? So, it is this question of safety that has erupted into our consciousness. Is like saying, wow, things are much more volatile, even though I thought it was very, volatile all along for the past 4 years. Then I realize, and how do I balance not overreacting and finding my sense of peace, and how to engage? So it's when you're already hypervigilant.
Yeah, Thank you for that question. It's I think there's a couple pieces to that. One is that the sense of creating sanctuary, creating a sacred, safe place for yourself internally becomes really important, because in point of fact, if the boat is sinking, the most important thing people can do is sit still and let the people that know how to save the boat do something. Until it's time to jump into the water, and then you jump into the water. But panicking will simply make the boat tip over more quickly. And the same if there's a fire in a facility, the tendency would indeed be, if there was a fire right now, would be for all 16 of us to get up and run around if we were in a room together trying to put the fire out. The smarter thing would be for us to say, everyone except Stephen and Janos, get out, go out and be safe. And we're going to work on putting the fire out till the fire department comes. So that the immediate reaction, as I absolutely agree with you, the immediate reaction probably for most of us, because of our personality types, would be to be waving blankets and throwing cups of water and carrying on. And that's generally not the best thing to do. And then on the other side of that, you know, we've experienced a trauma. You know, people that watched that go on Wednesday, people who were there, people who are the families of those, the 5 folks who were killed, the families of everybody else, and us as a country. We experienced trauma, and our international guests as well. And so one of the ways that I'm sure you know and others know that you work with trauma is to say, yeah, okay, so that could happen again. And if it did this weekend, as they're talking about, or on the inauguration, one assumes there'll be better plans. But in any event, I'm not part of the National Guard, so I'm not going to be there. What I can do, sort of like my answer about COVID, what I can do is help folks to be calm about, you know, we're a nation of 380 million people, and 4,000 of them showed up in Washington on Wednesday, and a couple hundred of them behaved as terrorists. And so the world that we live in is actually pretty safe. It's safe even though that happened. Now, we need to pay attention because they represent folks across the country who have been scared into behaviors of criminality and hate and so forth and so on. We need to be aware of that and so forth. But in terms of my getting ready for the possible manufacture of misery on the day of the inauguration, is the best thing I can do is talk to other people calmly and quietly about, we got this new president and vice president coming in. We've got possibilities for good work to be done on climate, good work to be done on racial justice, good work to be done on health justice. Let's stay in that, aware that the world is complicated and non-dualistic, so all that other stuff is going on. But I think the trauma, and when I work with, as a therapist with folks with trauma, it's like, okay, so knowing when you actually are safe or are potentially safe, and that there's not actually a spark of fire in the corner of every room you go into. And so continuing to work until you say, yep, sometimes I'm in an old raggedy building with a fireplace and I need to be paying attention. But sometimes I am actually safe. And so to the degree to which we can turn down that heat and help people feel comfortable in the levels to which we are in fact safe most of the time.